Dear friends, I cordially invite all of you for this exciting online webinar on the theme Hindu-Christian Dialogue for Fellowship, a series of online lectures and discussions jointly organized by Ecumenical Christian Center, Sri Ramakrishna Mission, Office for Ecumenism and Dialogue, Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, and Focolare movement. Today we have the 18th lecture on the theme Sages and Saints, Saint Edith Stein. Today we have a genius, an excellent scholar, an amazing human being, Reverend Father Dr. John F. Sequeira. Reverend Father Dr. John F. Sequeira is a disclassed Carmelite priest from the province of Karnataka, Goa. He is presently the rector at Pushpashrama Philosophate, Mysore, Karnataka. He is the former director of Raishvana, a center for inner silence and contemplative prayer, situated at Ranipura, Mangalore, Karnataka, India. Father John completed his master's in philosophy at the Karnataka University and German linguistics from the University of Vienna, Austria. He has a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical University Angelicum, Rome, specialized in hermeneutics, that is, interpreting the classical texts, and 2 outstanding postdoctoral diplomas in comparative hermeneutics and human resource development. He is visiting professor to many seminaries and postgraduate centers of learning in India and abroad. Apart from his teachings in philosophy, religion, and mysticism, he is also engaged in conducting human resource development programs. As a preacher, Father John is known for his workshops on contemplative prayer and inner quiet. He is the founder and chief editor of Dhyana, a journal of religion and spirituality, and founder editor of Jiva Jala, a Kannada magazine on spiritual reflections for everyday. Besides being a regular writer to many well-known journals of philosophy and spirituality, he has also authored books such as Discipline of Dialogue, Transforming Formation, and Combating Terrorism. Father John, we're extremely delighted to have you with us. We're fortunate to have you with us. With the due respect and immense gratitude, I hand over this time to you to present your paper. Thank you so much, Father.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar, for those beautiful words of welcome and appreciation. Let me go straight away to the text. It's a joy to be with you once again to participate in this webinar. And I really congratulate Father Matthew Chandran Gunnell for the great work that he is doing as director of Ecumenical Center. The topic of our discussion today, under that great title, Sages and Saints, happen to be Edith Stein, or whom we call in religion Saint Benedicta of the Cross, Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, if you want the whole one. We have 3 routes: the Jewish route, the phenomenological route as a philosopher, and then the Christian route because she became a Roman Catholic, and then a great ardent reader of St. Thomas Aquinas. So as we are going through the life, I also want to share with you the most unconventional, the most controversial and enigmatic person that we have today. But at the same time, a great seeker of truth, an ardent lover of God and of humanity. If I had to go back and learn or just summarize the entire philosophy both phenomenological and Christian. I think this 1 hour or 45 minutes are not enough. So what I thought is I have just summarized a few things, and I will be reading a text for you, and then maybe at the end of it, let's just what is called interact with each other. Edith Stein was born on October 12th, 1891, on the feast of Yom Kippur in a Persian Jewish family living in Breslau, Poland. Her father died when she was an infant and was brought up by her mother, along with the love and company of 6 brothers and sisters. Her mother was a very shrewd businesswoman, and they had a successful lumber business, and therefore the children could be educated well, and most of them even went to attain the university education. Edith was a brilliant student. She completed a basic education which was geared towards the university admission. She was an extremely reserved person and was silent about everything regarding her personal life. And therefore, till today, we don't have anything about her personal life which was spoken by her. On obedience, after entering in the Carmel of Cologne, she was told by her mother to write her autobiography, and she wrote only a few pages telling why she joined the Carmel of Cologne and nothing else. In fact, Stein's reticence about discussing her inner life continued until her untimely death. When once asked for details about her conversion to Roman Catholicism, she responded with a famous phrase, "Secretum meum mihi," my secret is my own. Her own family called her a book sealed with 7 seals. And whatever we know about her today, either through her books, and I will make a comment on that at the end of it, how the Science of the Cross, which is a commentary about the works of St. John of the Cross, speaks much about her spiritual life. I make a comment on that at the end of this session. At the age of 13, very surprising thing happened. Stein declared surprisingly her wish to discontinue her studies. Furthermore, she even claimed to have lost her Jewish faith. Though proclaiming herself as an atheist, she continued to carry through with the religious observances that punctuated her home and family life. Stein never openly declared her atheism. She simply accepted it as a fact. Troubling to her mother and siblings, Stein's decision to quit school was highly unconventional. As a matter of fact, she found the education imparted in schools and faith orientations of her time both boring and meaningless. She was growing tired of school, and serious philosophical questions began to preoccupy her mind at that young age. Questions that were never engaged at school. She was a stuff cut out for unconventional and transcendental things. It is considered to be quite unique for Stein to reject the 2 mainstays of her family, namely her Jewish faith and her bourgeoisie push for education, given her age and situations. Her adolescence then was critically punctuated by 2 huge influences that will continue to surface in Stein's life, namely education and religion. However, she was not content with the usual religious and educational opportunities provided. She rejected the standard and sought higher education in order to attempt to become one of the few women chairs in philosophy in Germany, thereby refusing to be a traditional teacher. As we shall see later, her religious conversion and her desire to enter Carmel also proved painful and unconventional. After spending some time with her sister, Stein returned to school and completed the required exams for university admission. She decided to study psychology at the University of Breslau. While following the lectures of the psychologist William Sturm, Stein came across Edmund Husserl's logical investigations. Reading logical investigations and believing in the validity of Husserl's claim and insights, Stein transferred herself from University of Breslau to the University of Göttingen in 1913, where Husserl was extraordinary professor of philosophy. We see in this decision to study with Husserl a profound desire to know the nature and essence of things as they are in themselves, in their epistemological certainty. Throughout her autobiography, Stein describes both herself and Husserl as searching for truth. She was not content with studying secondhand, for she went to the originator himself to learn more about the changes he proposed to psychology, science, and philosophy. And that may be one of the reasons why later on she becomes a Roman Catholic. She enters a convent and builds a mystical tradition. She wants to go to the originator, God himself. Stein received a doctorate from the University of Freiburg in Breisgau, summa cum laude, in 1917, a high honor that was certainly rare in her age. Husserl had transferred from Göttingen to Freiburg while Stein was on leave volunteering as a nurse on the Austrian front during the First World War. For her doctorate, she had chosen to work on the topic empathy because Husserl had mentioned it in his lectures, but he had never fully developed his analysis. Stein saw her work as making a contribution to Husserl's research, and Husserl, impressed by Stein's choice, agreed to be her supervisor. After receiving her doctorate, Stein became Husserl's assistant. She prepared for publication his tiny bundles of manuscripts written in Gabelsberger shorthand, which she learned in order to carry out her work. Stein not only edited Husserl's works, she also pieced them together and substantially rewrote sections so that his work made sense. For example, she put together Husserl's now famous Ideas Part 2, Ideas Part 3, along with his on the phenomenology of the consciousness and internal time, which Martin Heidegger claimed as his own, but which in fact was Stein's doing. While editing and teaching courses and seminars for Husserl, Stein also wrote two substantial works of her own, Philosophy of Psychology and Humanities and On the State. Now this is a subject that we will be dealing a little later. These works are concrete applications of the phenomenological method and are only now being reread for their historical and philosophical merit. At the time, they were written as texts to be presented for habilitation. Stein's works were published by Husserl in his series Yearbook for Philosophy and Phenomenological Research. In 1918, Stein decided to leave Husserl to work as an independent philosopher. She and Husserl had agreed to work on a mutual project of philosophical collaboration, namely Ideas Second, but Husserl had a terrible habit of never completing anything he started. Husserl would constantly differ and delay reading Stein's reworking and elaborations of Ideas Second manuscripts. So she refused to go on working this way. Husserl and Stein came to an amicable situation or separation. Stein then tried unsuccessfully to habilitate at the universities of Kiel, Breslau, and Göttingen. She even hatched a scheme where she would help her friend Hans Lips to habilitate by helping him with his writing. Once Lips habilitated, Stein would be made his assistant. This plan never materialized, and Stein was never habilitated and never became a professor, a full-time professor, because of the prejudice against women during her time. The second key ingredient that helped to form Stein's unconventional life for her feminism In Stein's early university life, she was one of the few women studying philosophy. She was also one of the few women who demanded habilitation in philosophy. While completing a doctorate on the topic of empathy, Stein became seriously engaged in the feminist movement. At that time, women in philosophy were not allowed to habilitate or hold professorial chairs. In 1910, the German state allowed a woman to habilitate in mathematics. Stein argued that women in philosophy should be allowed the same opportunity. She campaigned and wrote letters to the various ministries to change the law. Eventually, the law was changed, but the attitude of the male professors, administrators of the universities, and the Ministry of Education made it practically impossible for women to habilitate in philosophy because of blatant sexism. Needless to say, Stein, being a woman and a Jew, did not stand well with many of her colleagues in various universities. Husserl himself, believing that women ought to not hold chairs in philosophy, was reluctant to support his former assistant in her bid for rehabilitation. In a recommendation letter to the Ministry of Education written on Stein's behalf, Husserl closes his letter with a sarcastic remark: "If academic careers should ever be opened up for women, I would warmly recommend Stein for habilitation." In 1931, finding that her intellectual activities were dominating her life, Stein once again unsuccessfully took up her attempt to habilitate. Heidegger, like Husserl before him, was not very receptive to the idea. Stein recounts that he was curt and dismissive, urging her to visit Martin Honecker, the Catholic chair in philosophy. Part of the process of applying for habilitation involved the submission of the substantial and original work of philosophy to be evaluated by experts and ministry of bureaucrats. The result of this exercise was finite and eternal being. Einige und ewige Sein. Now, this is a book I will be referring again and again, which attempts to bring Husserlian, medieval, and Thomistic thought together. Stein's later life. Stein was converted to Catholicism after reading the autobiography of Teresa of Avila while visiting her friend Hedwig Conrad Marcius in summer 1921. She found in Teresa of Avila a depiction of God as a God of love that surpasses human knowledge and understanding. Judging from the way Stein led her life prior to her entering to Carmel, with this deep commitment to prayer and the cultivation of the interior life, one can see why Teresa would resonate with Stein and how Carmelite spirituality deeply impressed her. She was baptized on January 1st, 1922. Meanwhile, Stein accepted a position at St. Magdalena's College at Speyer, Germany. There, she was responsible for teaching and preparing young women to become teachers. It is here at this time, amidst her teaching responsibility, Stein immersed herself in prayer, scholarly work, and translations of St. Thomas Aquinas. After her conversion to Catholicism, Stein wanted to join immediately a religious order, but her spiritual director convinced her that she would be of better service in the world, teaching and continuing with her work, with her philosophical work. Stein's conversion was very unconventional on two accounts. First, it did not go well with her family, especially with her beloved, devoted Jewish mother. Second, it was very strange for her to become a Roman Catholic, especially when her godmother, Hedwig Conrad Marcius, and other intellectuals were Protestant. Needless to say, Stein's conversion to Catholicism pained her mother. She still accompanied her mother to the synagogue, but her conversion was received as a rejection of Judaism and her family. Moreover, her academic friends would have questioned why she was not converted to Protestantism. Catholicism was not looked very favorably in those intellectual circles at that time. It was seen as backward and not very liberal. The choice for Catholicism was expressed by Stein in following words. Catholic Church had people praying and visiting even though there were no services or functions taking place. Christ was always present in the sacrament, and it was this real presence that is most attractive to me. She was known to spend long hours before the Blessed Sacrament, praying and contemplating, both as a religious and as a teacher at St. Magdalene's. Teaching at a women's college, Stein began to reflect more seriously on the nature of women and their vocations. She was invited to give public talks and lectures, and was even commissioned to write a report on women's education and educational reform for Ministry of Education. She also gave a radio address on the subject, though the tape of the recording has since been lost. In 1932, she managed to acquire a teaching position at the Institute of Higher Learning, the Pedagogical Institute at Mysore. She was appointed docentin and was assigned to give lectures on the philosophical anthropology and education. Having completed and delivered a semester of lectures, Stein had begun to prepare her lecture notes for a course on theological anthropology when in 1933, the anti-Jewish laws were passed in Germany. She was stripped of her appointment at the Pedagogical Institute at Mysore, and her metaphysical work was not allowed to be published. She was also forbidden to speak publicly and to publish material. Forbidden to teach and publish, Stein was now free to pursue religious life. She goes now again to her spiritual father. You see, now I'm free. I don't have any commitment in the world, so why can't I join the religious life? And her spiritual father gives her permission. She decided to enter Carmelite Monastery at Cologne in 1933. One of the reasons she chose that particular Carmel was because the community was thinking of opening a sister house in Breslau, her hometown, which would have enabled her voluntarily or eventually to be close to her family. Needless to say, Stein's decision shocked and angered her family. Her mother broke down in tears and could not accept her daughter's ultimate decision to separate herself from them. Accepting the habit meant strict enclosure. Moreover, Stein's conversion to Roman Catholicism shocked her intellectual colleagues as well. They would not understand why she wanted to join the Carmelites, an order that did not have a great intellectual tradition like the Benedictines. Despite all the controversy and pain caused by her decision, Edith Stein entered the convent at Cologne in 1933 at the age of 41. A little bit about Stein's religious life. By all accounts, was one of intense prayer, writing, sadness, and joy. She was always conscious about German anti-Semitism and the impact that would have on her and her religious sisters and her family. To this end, she wrote Pope Pius XII, explaining the state of affairs and asking for an audience to discuss the situation of the Jews. She received a formal institutional response acknowledging her letter, but it failed to address her concerns. Saint decided to dedicate her life to the suffering of her people in order to help relieve their pain. Stein made a solemn vow to her prioress, promising to devote herself in prayer and sacrifice for the sake of the Jews. On August 2, 1942, in retaliation for the Dutch bishop's public letter protesting the Nazi persecution of the Jews in Holland, the Nazis came to the Carmel at Aix and asked that Edith Stein and her sister Rosa Stein go with them. They were to be interrogated. Stein and her sister were immediately transported to Amersfoort. On August 4, 1942, they were transported from Amersfoort to the camp at Westerbork. Subsequently, they were transported east to Auschwitz. Stein's heroism in the camp was remarkable. She looked after children whose parents were not in a state of mind to look after them. She consoled those who were frightened and grieving. These were the reports given by eyewitnesses who knew and recognized Stein still in Carmelite habit. On August 9, Stein and her sister Rosa were executed in the guest chamber as Birkenau. The canonization process began in 1962 on May 1st. And on May 1st, 1987, Edith Stein was beatified. On October 11, 1998, she was raised to the status of saint and proclaimed patroness of Europe by John Paul II. The beatification and canonization provoked much controversy, as did the desire to build a convent named after her at Auschwitz. Some Jews, Protestants, and Catholics protested the building and canonization. They claimed that Edith Stein was not a martyr for her Catholicism, but for her being Jewish. This controversy, however, has its roots in Stein's life, especially with her conversion to Catholicism and her decision to enter religious life. Edith Stein's decision to become Catholic is unique, and it has its legacy in the uniqueness of a person, which has been controversial and unconventional from the start. I took some time purposely to get into each spheres of the life of Edith Stein. I will restrict now to two areas of the philosophy of Edith Stein, because we are concentrating on saints and sages. And therefore, we are not interested in the philosophy section. We are interested in the spirituality section. And therefore, I have taken only two ideologies of Edith Stein, that is her philosophy of the human person as a phenomenologist and as a Thomist later after her conversion, and also her concept of community, maybe in relation to the state, a work that she had done even before her conversion. Edith Stein's doctoral dissertation entitled On the Problem of Empathy holds the key to understand her intellectual and spiritual orientations, that is, phenomenology and Christian philosophy simultaneously, although they differ greatly one from another. I would rather summarize the development of our entire thought pattern under two main areas: philosophy of the person and the philosophy of community and society. Edmund Husserl had used the term empathy to express the knowing experience shared by two persons, that is, intersubjectivity. It is only this process, he believed, that allows us to know the world objectively. In Stein's study, which Husserl acknowledged to be quite independent, she examines the nature of empathy in order to understand person as a physical, psychical, and spiritual entity. Now, this is the most important part. A human person is physical, psychic, and spiritual person. But in this analysis, she reviews not only the process of self-knowledge, but also the knowledge of the other person as the basis of human relationship and social community. In her early and later work, Stein stresses that spirit is the essence of personhood. But the use of the term spirit has to be understood differently before and after her conversion. True to her calling as a phenomenologist, her earlier study is mostly a philosophy of consciousness. She uses the word God only 4 times, and that too briefly. In the later work, the element of grace is added, for now there is keen recognition of God's spirit within the person. Edith Stein opines that an understanding of the nature of empathy yields knowledge of the self, the I as person, but also offers knowledge of the other. Knowledge of the self is perceived in actual experience, but the knowledge of the other is gained through empathy. Because I cannot doubt the consciousness of my own experience as given to my I life, I understand that the other I also has thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Thus, I understand the consciousness of the other through empathy. The term person for Stein holds two levels of meaning. Primarily, person would rest on the pure I, which is independent of time and place. The second level of meaning lies in the flood of consciousness involving personal experiences, what we call today historicality or historicity, which is both time and place and marks our individuality. The soul carries the personal stream of consciousness, its attributes, habits, attitudes. It is the center of reference for sensations, emotions, and volitions. And its special unity stems from the particular content of its own stream of experience. The soul is the habitat of the I life, which wills and controls the lived body. It is described this lived body as a unity of localized sensations, and these footings in great part constitute the nature of consciousness. So there is something called pure I life, and lived body, the three expressions. We express our feelings through acts, but because we are spiritual creatures, we need motivation to propel our feelings into acts. We seek a meaning content in our acts. Thus, motivation is the law preceding action. The person goes from one act to another in meaning context. Indeed, the physical psychical person becomes the spiritual person as the one who acts, for action proceeds meaningfully from the total structure of the person. So what makes you spiritual is that motivation or the meaning that you arrive at or you give to your actions. Although the action of the will is free and autonomous, it is not always able to overcome the limitations of the physical and psychic being. Yet the will can master both body and soul. But the will is also based on feelings. The thought I want is affirmed by I can, and then I will. This element of action is determinate of the spiritual person as distinct from the physical psychical person. The spiritual person is aware of feelings and levels of meaning and is motivated into action. And these voluntary acts, born of spirit, shape not only personal, but social and cultural life. Now, this is based on her, what is called phenomenological background. After her conversion as a Christian philosopher, Edith Stein adds great wealth of mind and spirit in her analysis of the person. She writes, each one of us is created and designed by God to be his image and likeness. In fact, we are his image. But since the nature of fallen humanity renders us far less than perfect, God gave us his resplendent image, Christ, to lead us back to perfect nature. According to Edith Stein, the final goal of education is the attainment of the original nature given by God. Education thus plays an important role in the process of shaping the human personality. It supplies formative materials constantly integrated by physical, psychical person. The end result is the gestalt, the shape of the soul. But the other factors enter in. The person is responsible for self-formation, but it is God who is the master educator. And he is forming what he himself has given us. She writes, just as an inner form resides in the seed of plants, an invisible folk making a fortress should up here and a beach there, there is in this way an inner mold set in human beings which urges the evolution into a certain direction and works towards a certain gestalt in blind singleness of purpose, that of the personality which is mature, fully developed, and uniquely human. For Stein, the divine being is the archetype of all finite personal beings. The individual person is most like a divine being in the very fact that she or he is a person, because God is personal being. Thus, the primary analogia entis implies the relation of the divine I to the multiplicity of the finite being. Every person is an I. We as created persons are a part image of God, but Christ is God's perfect image, for He and God are one. Edith writes that only a person can create. The rational order and the aim of the world indicate its creator as a personal agent, because reason and freedom are essential marks of the person. She ventures further. If person is a reason-endowed nature, then person also expresses a spiritual nature, because spirit and reason are inseparable. Hence, spirituality and personhood are connected. The I inherent in the person is understood as personal life freely fashioning itself. We have seen that in our earlier work, Edith has defined person as physical, psychical, spiritual. Now, as a Christian philosopher, she adds depth of meaning. She offers the analysis of her friend Hedwig Conrad Marcius concerning the constitution of the person. Corporeal being is an earthly entity which is born out of itself and unfolds its shape, manifesting what it is inclusively. Soul is a hidden life from which the physical entity attains embodiment and which urges the embodiment's unfolding as a becoming entity. Spirit is supraworldly, able to leave self in devotion to others. It is a fixed unfolding of perfect selflessness. The words becoming entity are important here, for Edith tells us, in line with Aristotle and scholastics, that living creatures are distinct from inanimate objects in that there is a shaping power within which changes matter. In this being and becoming, there is an intended unfolding. The being becomes, develops, unfolds to the perfection of its nature as a full self. She writes that God leads each person in his or her own path. Some come more close easily, some quickly to the goal than others. What we can do personally is actually little compared to what is done in us, but we have to do that little. Above all, this means to pray persistently for the right path and to follow the call of grace when it becomes evident without any resistance. Only one may not set time limit for the Lord. Let me go ahead. The interior life, so described in the true center of the physical, psychical, spiritual being, a person's nature radiates from the soul's interior and magnetizes others. The more recollectedly a man lives in the interior of his soul, the stronger will be the radiation that emanates from him and exercises a spell on others. To live in one's interior depths is to harness one's powers, measure little things in view of eternity, and regulate behavior accordingly. Such a soul is on its way to final formation and to the perfection of its being. Unfortunately, Edith writes, most people live on the periphery of their being. And she adds in a footnote, our Holy Mother Teresa says that it is surely an ambiguous, indeed abnormal condition that one does not know his own house. She is taking this imagery from Interior Castle, where St. Teresa of Avila says, my dear daughters, but most of us are just wandering outside the castle, even not daring to look inside. In her book, Science of the Cross, Edith writes that the person is created to live in his or her inmost being. Here the soul possesses and rules itself by way of its ego, which is most free in the deepest part of the soul's interior. Only from this depth can a person make free decisions, relate to others, and find his or her allotted place in the world. If a man is not wholly master of himself, he will not be able to dispose of anything with the true freedom, but will be subject to external influencers. I leave many. Now, finally, she asks, if the creator is the archetype of creation, then should we not find in creation a likeness insofar as it is also the three-in-oneness of the primary being? She answers, there is thus in the entire scope of real entities a three-way unfolding of being. There is a united three-way unfolding of the body, soul, and the spiritual life. These image the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. God the Father is linked to the psychical being. The soul images our prime creator by creating in a flow of divine life out of itself and by providing the source of life. God the Son, begotten not made, is seen as living nature. Christ is the inner word within the person, forming the shape of the lived body in his image God. And Holy Spirit is seen as a free and selfless flow of the Spirit, which moves within us in gratuitous acts, renewing the face of the earth from its streams of living water. For Holy Spirit knows in the divine light within the first intended shape of creation, despite deformed husk it has become. Let me go to the second topic. Hope I have another 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah, we have already discussed the philosophy of the human person. Let us go now quickly to her philosophy of the community. So, for Edith Stein, the foundation of social relationship is empathy between the I and the other. She asks, how can one build a bridge from the I to another person? To answer this question, she also asks, what is the structure of a person who can, through empathy, approach another person? In her doctoral dissertation on the problem of empathy, Stein gives a description of the 5 elements of the person. The pure I, consciousness, that is from phenomenological philosophy, body, soul, and spirit, that is from mystic. And all these elements build a person as a united whole. Edith Stein describes the constitution of the human being further in order to present a right theory of empathy and true knowledge of the other. For Edith, empathy is the perceiving of foreign subjects and their experiences. We cannot have the other's original experience in his exact sameness, but we do come very close to that by substituting ourselves for that person in his or her experience. Disagreeing with the basic concept given by other philosophers, she writes that she is never one with the other and never able to become so, but what one knows of one's own structure as person initiates knowledge of the other. We see ourselves spiritually in images of our own nature. We see another in ourselves, and these images confront us in another man. But not only do we gain knowledge of the other based on the commonality of the human spirit, we also gain in knowledge of self. Quoting Friedrich Schiller, she writes, do you want to know yourself? Then see what moves another. Thus, every comprehension of the other person enlarges our own personhood. Recognition of the other as a fellow human being implies respect for him or her. This consciousness of the other as belonging to the same being, God, is like knowing that one's hand is part of one's own body. Her reverence for the other stems from the Jewish concept of the person as a unique image of God, and it embraces those every religion, culture, and race. This is in keeping with the biblical account of the children of the earth created as one family. This is human solidarity. In our diversity, we human beings have a common significance in our very likeness of God. She asked, who is my neighbor? Her answer is, whoever is near us and needing us most is our neighbor. It doesn't matter whether he is related to us or not, whether we like him or not, whether he is morally worthy of our help or not. The love of Christ knows no limits. The individual and the community, what is the relationship? Edith Stein writes that in order to recognize a common humanity and to know oneself as an integral, responsible part of it, one must be advanced in personal development. With the first awakening of reason, one is part of an intimate community like the family or other formative group. There has not yet been any opportunity to observe larger groups as an entire tribe, folk, race, or total humanity. But these smaller communities do provide the necessary paths to experience the total human reality. For we understand the hidden oneness in the intimate community. Identification with one's own community is important since we contrast this to others with whom we may be acquainted and with whom we judge as behaving strangely, as being foreign to us. Yet, this experience of the human oneness in our own community prepares us for the comprehension of humanity as an encompassing and basic whole. In spite of all differences, we find ourselves united with the people of all times and places. We are enriched and replenished through our contact with persons who are conditioned differently. Let me give a few things about the nature of the state that I went up. For Edith Stein, the state is like a community, a living organism composed of spiritual persons. Both state and communal life entail an us awareness. But only spiritual persons can have personal relationships, for the state itself has no soul. It is the communal bonding of persons within the state that certifies its existence. Hence, an existing community is the basis of a concrete state. Thus, she investigates the communal life of the members of the state in order to determine the structure of the state. Her study entitled An Investigation of the State, which was written in 1920 when she was just a phenomenologist, still she was motivated by her natural political bent, identification with the existential person, and the ferment of times. Hitler's ideology was being loudly proclaimed as he became leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1921. His manifesto, Mein Kampf, was published in 1924 and 1926. Her Edith Stein study was printed in 1925. In this work, Edith Stein examines the whole gamut of national life, its psychological, philosophical, political, and spiritual elements. It remains a phenomenological study as she describes the state's essence and structure. Its first section is entitled The Ontological Structure of the State. Here she examines the nation as a community under government control, human rights, natural factors, and influence state structure and citizenry, questions of the freedom and sovereignty, and the question of people and nation. The second division, entitled The State under the Aspect of Values, considers the state and justice, moral values, state, and the church. She asks so many questions. I am not going to go into that. You have the notes with you. I just finish it up with the last word. It is fascinating to walk along Edith Stein in reliving her life and philosophy. A multifaceted person exclusively in search of truth, never being satisfied by anything less than what is authentic, was never at rest till she finally found it. Her search for truth was abruptly ended by her brutal murder in the concentration camp at Auschwitz. So too her last work on John of the Cross, titled The Science of the Cross. It is this book finally gives us a glimpse of her own personal life, a passionate woman with an abounding passion for humanity and for God. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Father Dr. John F. Sequeira, for the stunning and inspirational presentation of the life of Saint Edith Stein. Before I give this time to the moderator, let me introduce the moderator for this amazing webinar, by name Professor Dr. Ashok Alur. An excellent human being, is a friend of all. Moreover, he doesn't need any introduction because he is both locally, globally well-recognized scholar with an outstanding reputation in the area of agriculture. Professor Dr. Ashok Alur is a person with massive willpower and intelligence. Professor Dr. Ashok Alur is currently director at the Center for Excellence of a Farmer Production Organization and Institute of Government of Karnataka in collaboration with the Department of Horticulture and University of Horticultural Sciences, Bagalkot. Professor Dr. Ashok Alur received a PhD in agriculture from University of Agricultural Sciences, Dharwad in India. He has more than 20 years of experience in agriculture, higher education, international cooperation, natural resource management, farmers institutions, etc. He held different prestigious positions such as Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics, and University of Horticultural Sciences, Bagalkot, Karnataka, India. He also served as a Vice Chancellor in Anantapur, Andhra Pradesh, India. Currently serves as the Director, Center of Excellence for Farmer Producer Organizations. He has received many prestigious awards, including honor from ICRISAT, International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics, for its outstanding and stunning contributions to reduce poverty, malnutrition, environmental degradation, honorary recognition from FCRI Thailand, honorary credential from China, Sarvottam Seva Award, Science Communicators Award, and Independence Day honors from the Government of Karnataka. He has received honors from the Government of Mozambique, Republic of Swaziland. He has served as an honorary expert for the food security programs in the Republic of Mozambique and the Republic of Swaziland. Member on Regional Committee in United Nations Development Program, EGEF, Israel Technology Committee, and many other committees. In fact, Professor Father Ashok Alur presented an outstanding and inspirational, stunning presentation on the life of Lord Basavanna on August 19th. It was personally an eye-opener for me and many of us. After his online lecture on the Lord Basavanna, I personally became a student of Lord Basavanna. With due respect and immense gratitude, I cordially invite Professor Dr. Ashok Alur to kindly moderate this amazing webinar on the life of Saint Edith Stein. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your kind words. And before we get into the discussions on the, a wonderful topic, on Saint Edith Stein, presented by Reverend Dr. John Sequeira. I missed the earlier part because I was in the flight. I could not, listen to most part of his earlier presentation. But I could join only after I landed in Mangalore. It was a wonderful, scholarly presentation by Reverend Dr. John Sequeira, and which he really highlighted the great life of Saint Edith Stein, a wonderful philosopher, a modern philosopher who has been a great humanist. And she was also the student of Edmund Husserl and also colleague of Martin Heidegger. And, she talked about the philosophy on empathy and phenomenology. And this is a great message to the entire humanity. And I first, before I request the scholarly audience to ask questions, clarifications, give their opinion, I wholeheartedly, congratulate and thank Reverend Dr. John Sequeira for a very scholarly and a most wonderful presentation. And now the forum is open, and I request the scholarly participants of this great evening to seek any clarifications. If you have any questions to ask, kindly, present them. Thank you so much.
Good evening, Father John Sequeira. Thank you very much for this beautiful presentation of Edith Stein. Really a very profound soul. Many words that you read of hers, you could make out it's really coming from a deep experience. You briefly, towards the end, just gave us the title of Science of the Cross. I think that's the name of the book. We see also empathy in its height in the cross, actually. But what does Edith Stein say? A few words on her experience with suffering and how she understood this towards these last moments, probably, of her life.
Father John, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yes. Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I think one of the excellent question. Thank you, Cheryl. She joins the Cloister Carmel of Cologne, and there she tells her mother prioress, "I have stopped writing. I don't want to write anything more. I want to spend my time in prayer." And there she begins to read and read. Her mother asks her that she requires to write the reason for her joining. And she writes a very small leaflet, nothing more than that. Today it's available in the English translation. But later on, she knew very well from the day one that she would be one day persecuted for her faith. Not because she was a Christian or a Catholic, because she was of the Jewish origin. She would be caught one day. And then there's a reason why she even writes to the Pope to intervene. And when nothing comes from Rome, she tells her mother, "I'm going to offer my life for these suffering Jews." Now that is a tremendous humanistic outlook. From there onwards, as I told you, you don't have anything spoken by Edith Stein on her personal life. Secretum meum mihi. My secret is my own. It is not available for you. I think she gets what is called insight from John of the Cross. Because the last book, The Science of the Cross, is nothing but a commentary on the collected works of St. John of the Cross, especially her John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul and Dark Night of the Spirit. And therefore, it is in the dark night of the soul and of the senses and the spirit, John of the Cross actually tells us how we require to detach ourselves from all that is worldly and offer it as an expiation. And therefore, what she actually does is not write a commentary on St. John of the Cross, rather simultaneously lives St. John of the Cross, and living John of the Cross, she lives what is called offers her life as an expiation for the suffering Jewish people, her humanity, her people around. Because let us go out to die for our people. That is what she tells her sister when she leaves for the Carmel of Echt, where she finally was caught by the Nazi regime. And therefore, I feel Edith Stein was nothing but an embodiment of the passion. Now, John of the Cross writes about his own passion in tune with our single-minded devotion to the cross, and therefore the passion of the Lord Jesus. And maybe that's the reason why she titles that book Science of the Cross. Although she doesn't say anything about her personal life, I think this unfinished work speaks volumes about the last days of Edith Stein.
Yeah, Father John, thank you very much for this illuminating sharing of your lecture on Edith Stein. I see that, she was so much interested in empathy.
Yes.
And then from a philosophical, phenomenological perspective, he is also going into the spiritual perspective of empathy.
Yeah.
So could you please explain a little bit about that?
Correct. The word empathy was basically a concept that she takes from Edmund Husserl, from his philosophical works as a phenomenologist. And therefore, for her, empathy is the relationship between two individuals. And that is what even Edmund Husserl meant intersubjectivity. Now, if you go back to Gabriel Marcel, Martin Buber, even for that matter, Heidegger, these are all existential philosophers, they had spoken about empathy. But empathy, if you are asking me to summarize, to be is to be with, to live is to exist is to coexist. I find myself in the other, all these things. There is one distinction Edith Stein makes, that I am distinct from the other. And therefore, I cannot enter into the other directly. The only way I can enter into the other is through my own experiences of the other. Just because I have my emotions, I have my feelings, I have my what is called loving nature, I'm sure that others also have it. And therefore, when these virtues come together, we come to know each other. Now, that is her first ideology, because there she makes a distinction between pure I and lived I, that is the streams of consciousness. Whereas when she comes to later on, where she writes her what is called the commentary or translation of De Veritatis of St. John of the Cross, of St. Thomas Aquinas. And finally, when he writes more, see, on the 70th birthday of Husserl, she had written an first shift. And in this first shift, she compares Edmund Husserl's phenomenology with St. Thomas Aquinas' what is called philosophy, which she takes up afterwards, that is in Eigenes und ewiges Sein, that is finite and eternal being. And it is here now, Edith Stein gets the fuller meaning of empathy. And therefore, when she speaks about the spirit in us, she says, it is the divine spirit, that the Holy Spirit helps us to flow out of ourselves, give ourselves to others in total expiation and in total love. And then she says, Jesus is the only model of the fullness of empathy. And therefore, I think even her martyrdom is nothing but an expression of that empathy. And therefore, for me, her entire life is nothing but a summary or textbook of empathy. Before I conclude, I want to thank Father Matthew. You know why, Father Matthew? On the 25th of May, you called me and told me that I have to prepare this text, or I have to prepare this one. Till that time, I knew Edith Stein as a philosopher, as a phenomenologist. Since I'm also what is called a student of phenomenology, existentialism, and postmodernism, and that was a fascinating subject for me. But the Thomistic side, I was not much aware. But from the 25th of May, I started my research. And I think I have read more than at least some 20 to 30 books thereafter. As I read more and more, Edith Stein became such a fascinating person for me. For the last 2 weeks, I had not taken any program. I told everyone I had a webinar I had to finish. And I was sitting and working on it. Thank you very much for this opportunity that's given. For me, it was a fascinating, experience to learn Edith Stein.
Thank you. Yes.
Father, Reverend Dr. John,
Yeah.
thank you so much for the in-depth understanding and the thought and the knowledge that you have been given to us, and it is sharpening our mind, body, and the soul. But I have one simple question. What is soul, and what is the will, and what is the spirit? Are these things going along with the empathy, with the personal development? Can you just elaborate a little more?
Yes. If you go to dogmatic theology, human soul is divided into two parts: sensory and spiritual. The sensory soul is again divided into two parts: external senses and internal senses. The spiritual soul is divided into three parts: memory, intellect, and will. Now, I think half of your question is already answered here. Now, before that, what is the distinction between the spirit and the soul? Remember, Edith Stein gives 5 components of the human person: the pure I, consciousness, body, memory, intellect, and the spirit. You see? And therefore, what is the connection between the spirit and the soul? The spirit is a spark of God. The pure I is the incarnation of the spirit in the human person. Soul is the manifestation of the spirit. You see? That this distinction, not many make it. For example, my light in my room is burning. Why? Because there is electricity. But how do I know there is electricity? Because the light is burning. The light manifests electricity. So the spirit is manifested by the human soul, and therefore the entire attributes of the soul, whether sensory or the spirit. Now, and therefore, actual Christian theology doesn't make a distinction, or it's called that total distinction between body, psychic, spiritual, although there are distinctions. However, we are talking about one person, and therefore Edith Stein speaks about personhood, where all these components are so unitedly become one. And therefore, empathy is the nature, or empathy is the foundation of the spirit. God is love. And therefore, the spark of God is in us. When you come to the fullness of that spiritual life, you become divine. It's no longer I who live, Christ lives in me. And therefore, empathy becomes the manifestation of the Christian life. I don't know whether I answered you.
Yeah, answer to my question. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Father.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yeah.
I can just make a comment on, I didn't realize the degree to which Edith Stein, that her thought resonates with existentialism. I never saw her in that light before, so I appreciated learning that about her.
Yeah, that's true. Because because most of the phenomenological thinkers were also existential thinkers. It was a very peculiar historical situation after forced Hegelian and logical positivism governing the entire philosophical world for so long. And therefore, in all this idealistic philosophy, the human existence was lost to sight of. And therefore, it is these phenomenological existentialists bring human existence and therefore human person back to its original dignity. And there's a great contribution that has been made by these philosophers.
Yeah, I see it. It connects with so many other issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Edward Ulrich is a professor from the University of St. Thomas, Minnesota, United States.
Great.
Yes,
I'm only a small man in St. Thomas. I don't know St. Thomas.
St. Thomas University in
I know. Although I studied in St. Thomas University in Angelicum, Rome, but my knowledge of St. Thomas is very, very limited. Yeah.
Yeah, I just to see Edith Stein has developed that potential from Aristotle and also from St. Thomas Aquinas.
Correct.
And she went into the depth of the person and a phenomenological, philosophical, and a spiritual combination she had made. So that initially, as you have said, I also was thinking that she's a saint, a spiritual person, not more than that. But when I read through her books and also her articles, I found that the depth of philosophy there and how she continued from Husserl, and unfortunately she was a rival to Heidegger. She would have been much larger position in the phenomenology if she was existing in the world, but she was really being eliminated by the Nazi regime. Otherwise, she could have, and then also her contribution to the women. I made a series of lectures on 3 women who were during that time of Nazi concentration camps. They were almost eliminated. One is Edith Stein, another was Etty Hillesum from Holland, and another one was Simon Weil. And then what I found that, these are heroines of happiness.
Correct.
So that was the title, and I am actually planning to come out with a book on these 3 as heroines of happiness, because they have gone through such a suffering situation. But all the 3 of them, and they were all Jewish, and this very hard, cruel situation, she has changed. They have changed it, the context, the cruelest context, into a happy context. That is from their attitude, from their perspective. So that perspective, I think that we are all undergoing some kind of difficulty situations and all, so that way I found that they are actual heroines.
Correct. Just to add to that, Matthew, as she was doing her translations of Ideas 2 and Ideas 3 of Husserl, she was not agreeing with Husserl. One of the reasons why she came out of being an assistant was that because the idea of intentionality and the eidetic, what is called things in themselves, in the ideal world, apart from the existential real world, was too much for her to bear with. And that's the reason she sides with Heidegger. She accepts Heideggerian historical, what is called perspective of phenomenology. But then the most beautiful part comes is where she combines historical aspect with the realistic aspect of St. Thomas Aquinas. I think that is the most beautiful part, where she finally comes to the things in themselves, that God is the final being. That is a beautiful contribution of Saint Teresa. Edith Stein.
Absolutely, yes.
Is there any other questions?
Father John, thank you for the presentation of that magnificent spirituality of or philosophy of Edith Stein. As a Jew and later embraced Christianity, as we are having a dialogue session, can you comment on comment on that her life was also a kind of dialogue between Judaism and Christianity? Can we find out in her philosophy and spirituality and so on, this dialogue between Judaism and Christianity?
Surely, Father. So surely the reason is, Judeo-Christian life is practically one. Because our text is practically one. The Old Testament, the idea of Yahweh and the Abba of the New Testament is practically one. And therefore, although she had lost her faith at the age of 13 in Judaism itself, and therefore, till she became Catholic, she had no inclination towards Judaism. But what really inspired her when she became a Catholic was her roots, her Judaic roots, and what she had learned in Judaism as a child. And therefore, that Abba experience, Yahweh's experience, I think that was something very good. And therefore, even when you read her writings, you find a Judaic mindset of understanding Christianity. Not so much a Christian theologian understanding, but a Judaic way of understanding, and therefore more a philosophical way of understanding Christianity. And therefore, her writings would be an excellent foundations for Judeo-Christian dialogue. Although her canonization was a controversy because of that, whether she died for Jews or she died for Catholics and all that. But I think apart from all this, what is called secondary things, I think deep within it would be an excellent text.
Okay, thank you, Father.
Just another question that comes to my mind. You mentioned at a certain point when she says, follow the path of grace. So what does she really, because I see there as a specific moment also of transformation, from a life that she probably had left her faith to an experience that she, so being a phenomenologist, maybe she probably also read this experience of grace in a particular way. Did she say something about it?
Yeah. Actually, the book Einiges und Ewiges Sein, that is finite and eternal being, summarizes the entire answer to your question. In the earlier phenomenological perspective, she defines human being as a physical, psychical, and spiritual. And what makes a person spiritual is meaning giving and value systems. Okay? Whereas when she becomes a Christian, the grace is added. And therefore, she comes to realize the divine presence within, and how that divine presence within motivates the person, and therefore meaning giving. You see, to be another Christ. And therefore she takes God as the archetype, Jesus Christ as the archetype of her Christian living. And therefore, as she grows, what she sees now, immediately the virtues come in, the values become virtues. And therefore, actually, she has not deviated much from her conceptual analysis, but of course, she has added a lot by using that word grace. Because finally, the efficaciousness of the human growth and transformation happens only in grace. Otherwise, it's become just a humanistic growth, It is a grace that transforms person. That is what the Christianity holds in. And she takes that, understands it perfectly, and then manifests who the human person is.
Dr. Ashok?
Yes, Father.
Yes.
Will conclude.
Yes.
No. Are there any other questions? Yeah, this has been a
Video is mute.
once.
We want to see you, sir.
Yes.
This has been a great, a very scholarly presentation by Reverend Dr. John Sequeira. And it was very nice to know that he has done so much of homework to really make this presentation. And I should thank him on behalf of all the participants, because your 2 months of, search, research, and study about, Saint Edith Stein is a great contribution to all of us. Otherwise, all of us would have to read and understand her, so much. So thank you very much for a wonderful presentation, and bringing a lot of values, her thoughts and contributions to the society, especially in defining, understanding, empathy in depth. That's a great thing. And it's very nice. I have heard very little about Edith Stein. I had never had in-depth knowledge about her contributions to the society, humanity, and all the philosophy, phenomenology. And thank you very much for a very scholarly presentation. And if you look at the questions asked by the participants, I think they have further, added value to the presentation. And all of them have been very scholarly questions. And you have given a very apt and very meaningful, replies and responses to most of the questions asked by the participants. So without taking much time, and I would wholeheartedly thank you on my personal behalf, on behalf of ECC, and for having brought the entire life sketch of Saint Edith Stein as a great philosopher, a great phenomenologist, and a person who really brought in a wonderful in-depth dialogue between Judaism and Christianity. And thank you, Father Matthew, for choosing such a wonderful personality, both for presentation and also for making us to know about it. And I thank every one of you and all the participants and ECC in particular for such a wonderful topic. Thank you so much. Look forward to see you all again sometime next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Father John and
Ashok.
Dr. Ashok. And yes, Father John has, as Dr. Ashok has already said, it was a fascinating and very reflective, informative, and depth research which you have presented to us. And Dr. Ashok, he was every time whenever we request Dr. Ashok, then he will be there. And he's actually very keen on having a kind of, this development of dialogical processes between the Christians and the Hindu communities, civilizations. So he used to have lots of reflections. And as you know, he was just landed. I don't know whether he was meeting the Prime Minister or the Chief Minister. So every other day, he's such an influential and very important personality, but he found time to come with us so that, to support. So there is also another reason why, Dr. Ashok, I wanted you to be the moderator, because last in your lecture on Dr. Basaveshwara, sorry for putting Basaveshwara, so the Basaveshwara, so everybody is called as doctor, so I put also honorary doctor to Basaveshwara. So in Basaveshwara's Vachanas, and then the Vachanakaras, one of the mystics is Akka Mahadevi. So I think that time I have already mentioned about Akka Mahadevi from the 12th century was speaking about her experiences with the divine, that is Chenna Mallikarjuna. that, she was asking through the poem that, why you have pierced my heart. There is pleasure and pain. And also the 16th century Teresa of Avila is also explaining why Jesus, you have pierced my heart, and I experienced the pleasure and the pain. So I am absolutely sure that Dr. Ashok and Father John, if you combine together, Father John is an expert on Teresa of Avila, and Dr. Ashok is also an expert on Akka Mahadevi. So I heard that, how he was fluently simply quoting from Akka Mahadevi. So maybe we can have a kind of interactions and maybe a book or a research. So this is also one of the intentions why I have placed both of you together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great pleasure for both of us.
That would be a great thing.
So for our Karnataka culture and also for Christianity and for this dialogical process, I think that will be a great contribution. And moreover, where Father John is the rector, the chapel is also so fantastic. You have the world religion symbols in the chapel itself. So maybe as a culmination, we can go to Father John's place and we can all meet together from these religious traditions and have a dialogue there. So that is again another positive way of or a process which not only theoretical, but we can also have some practical implications.
Most welcome.
Thank you very much.
We have around 40, 50 self-contained rooms.
Yes, we have already been to your place several times with even Ted from USA was also came and stayed there. So
You are most welcome.
We will make it, Father.
Anytime. It's going to be a pleasure.
Yes.
So nice. And
yeah, the next lecture will be by Ted Edward Ulrich on another great saint from India, that is Aurobindo, Maharshi Aurobindo. So he lived there in Pondicherry, interacted, went to several other places where Aurobindo was there. So next Thursday, 6 p.m. Only thing is that Ted will be getting up early.
thank you, Father. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.